Welcome to the Unpacking the Framework video series. This series provides valuable information about the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. My name is Denise Luscombe, and this video introduction is being recorded on Whadjuk Noongar Budja. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land you're listening from, and recognise their continued connection to country, waterways and community. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This video is one of a series that describes the evidence and practice information that underpins the principles of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You will hear from both national and international speakers throughout this video series. This video covers diversity affirming, a key principle of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention, and is presented by our national speaker, Katharine Annear. Katharine is a lecturer in disability practice in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University. She has a commitment to bringing lives of disabled people to the forefront of the curriculum and teaching experience for future disability practitioners. Her work as an educator and in policy and governance takes a human rights and disability justice approach. Katharine is currently Deputy Chairperson of the Autism CRC and a member of the Australasian Autism Research Council. She is a founding member and past chair of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network of Australia and New Zealand, and has spent over 20 years in the Australian disability advocacy space in both grassroots and high-level policy settings. She was an early contributor to the autism rights and global neurodiversity movements and played a role in bringing these perspectives to Australia.
Hello, my name is Katharine Annear. I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm presenting to you from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I'd like to acknowledge First Nations Australians, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, as the custodians of the land, sky and waters on which we live, work and play. I want to acknowledge that land was never ceded, and I want to acknowledge that I continue to support First Nations peoples' fight for justice and equity and recognition in Australia. I'm Katharine Annear, a developmental educator and lecturer in disability practice at Flinders University. I'm a person with disability who has worked in practice for many years, including in early childhood. I currently teach in early childhood practices and supports. I'm very pleased to be able to present to you on the diversity affirming principle as part of the early childhood intervention guidelines. When we talk about diversity affirming, we're talking about the fact that we recognise, value and respect the identities and strengths of the people we work with. This includes their abilities, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation and socioeconomic status. Why should we be diversity affirming? Through being diversity affirming, we honour the experiences of the people we work with. We can ensure safe and respectful relationships and environments, and through being diversity affirming, we work to uphold the rights of the people we work with. So important sets of rights that are laid out in things like the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. But these essentially outline human rights in frameworks that are applicable to children, and people with disability. We also want to be adhering to frameworks for Indigenous people and women and families. Essentially, we're working in a way that recognises the diversity of the population we work with and upholds their basic human rights. How should we be diversity affirming? We need to take an open-minded approach to our own learning and realise that learning is a lifelong practice. We need to be ready to challenge injustice when we see it. We need to be working collaboratively with families and children to remove barriers to inclusion and belonging. And we need to value relationship building and clear communication. So we're open-minded, we challenge injustice, we remove barriers, and we value those relationships that are core to practicing with families. I'm going to elaborate on some of the areas that we need to work on when we're thinking about being diversity affirming. The first is understanding bias. And by this, we need to accept that our thinking and decisions that we make are influenced by our own culture and beliefs and experiences. We need to work to understand those biases, and then we need to challenge our own biases by reflecting on our own assumptions and actively seeking the diverse perspectives of others, and realising that our way of seeing the world is only one way of seeing the world, and that there are a multitude of ways of seeing the world. And if that we stick with only our way of seeing the world, we might be subject to those biases of thinking. So it's up to us to be open-minded to challenging biases through those ongoing conversations with people from diverse backgrounds. Understanding ableism. Ableism isn't a term that we hear a lot about, but ableism is one of the isms. Similar to racism and sexism, ableism is a form of prejudice, and ableism is the attitudes and practices that discriminate against people with disability. We can challenge ableism and those other forms of discrimination by noticing it when it happens and acting to change attitudes and remove barriers. One of the things that we might need to do is have a look at our own ableism and understand that certain biases exist towards building a world that is built for people without disability. So we're used to being in a world that privileges people without disability. And we're all occasionally subject to ableism as a form of thinking and a particular bias that we need to challenge. Even as a person with disability, I'm subject to ableist thinking myself, and I need to continuously challenge that thinking. Understanding intersectionality. Through understanding an intersectional perspective, we recognise that people can experience more than one kind of discrimination at the same time. And we understand the impact of this discrimination. So, for example, if you belong to a different cultural group to the mainstream, you live in poverty and you're a parent of a child with disability, this opens you up to more than one form of discrimination and puts you in a unique situation where those kinds of discrimination interact and contribute to your unique circumstances. And so we need to appreciate the different aspects of a person's identity and lived experience and listen to how that plays out in their life in order to help them address those multiple forms of discrimination. Understanding neurodiversity. At its core, understanding neurodiversity is about understanding that there are different ways of thinking, learning, and experiencing the world. And these vary across the human spectrum. We value these differences, but we also understand that discrimination can occur when we reinforce the more typical ways of thinking, learning, and experiencing the world. So, neurodiversity is about understanding the whole population and that there is diversity within the whole population. Some people talk about neurodivergent and neurotypical as being ends of a spectrum of the styles of thinking, learning, and experiencing the world. Neurodivergent is where those thinking, learning, and experiences styles really differ from what we consider typical, and neurotypical is what we consider to fit within the typical realm in terms of what is expected in development and social norms. But the whole idea of the neurodiversity paradigm is that we see all thinking, learning, and experiencing styles as being a valuable part of the human spectrum. To be neurodiversity affirming, we appreciate that people need strategies that respond to their unique ways of knowing and being in the world. We appreciate that neurodivergent children may develop skills that look different to their peers. But those ways of developing and enhancing skills are just as valuable as the typical ways of doing that. And we help families understand and respond to their child's unique developing skills and their unique identity. And that might involve us helping a family appreciate difference and helping a family understand and relate to the ways in which their child is communicating and behaving, so that they can develop a deeper connection with that child and that they can assist the child to learn and grow through a deeper bond that comes from understanding their unique perspective in the world and how they can best form that bond by responding in different ways than might be typical. So we need to be wrapping around a family in neurodiversity affirming practice and valuing that child's uniqueness whilst appreciating that sometimes there are difficulties that we need to attend to in the dynamic of the world where neurodivergence is considered to be part of the disability paradigm. So when it comes to understanding disability, we understand that people experience disability as an interaction between their diagnosed condition and the social world. Sometimes we're working with families who are experiencing developmental delay. Sometimes we're experiencing families that have a diagnosed condition that was evident from birth or shortly after, but we want to be understanding that that condition alone doesn't constitute disability. It is part of the dynamic of disability. So it's a diagnosed condition and the interaction between their personhood and their environment. And we understand that people experience personal limitations due to that diagnosis, as well as barriers to participation. And we also need to understand that people with disability experience discrimination. And by extension, families with children with disability experience that discrimination. And we may be working with families where more than one family member experiences disability. It might be intergenerational. We might have parents with disability who are parenting children with disability. So we need to understand the impact of working with multiple generations of people who experience disability and the impact of discrimination on those family members and the family as a whole. We understand that adapting to disability may involve individual skill building and equipment, as well as changing the environment and removing barriers. And this is a dynamic process where we're considering those environmental and attitudinal barriers and building the most conducive environment for families and children to learn and grow and thrive, as well as a focus on what that child and family might need to do to enhance skill building and what specialised equipment they may need for things like mobility, organisation, and other skills. So it's not just about prescribing equipment and building therapeutic programs. It's about the holistic perspective of how the environment can be changed and what barriers can be removed to bring about the most successful opportunities for people with disability and their families. And we need to support families to access and understand information about disability. And this might be really important in your role to make that information as accessible as possible. So, is it in plain language? Is it neutral or positive? How do families navigate a whole lot of information on the internet about a particular condition? How do families remain resilient in the face of a huge amount of information? So, we need to support families to navigate that information environment as well as to navigate the barriers and the discrimination occurring in the world. We want to be pointing out positive representation of people with disability and linking families to information that contains positive representation of people with disability. And when we're looking at diversity affirming practice, we're looking at disability affirming practice, neurodiversity affirming practice, being mindful of our own biases and making sure that we understand that discrimination occurs in many different ways and can occur in multiple ways if a person belongs to different communities. It's really important to take stock of what diversity affirming practice means and how we then move to the practices, attitudes, and policies that actively recognise, value, and support human differences across a wide range of identities and experiences. But this means that we're making a commitment to lifelong learning for ourselves and that we realise that the people we work with, our colleagues, the families and children we work with are also lifelong learners. So we are working collaboratively together to understand that when we're diversity affirming, we always have more to learn and do in terms of making sure that our communities reflect our practice and that they're welcoming to a diverse range of children and young people and families.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, part of the video series Unpacking the Framework for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. The review of best practice in early childhood intervention was commissioned by the Department of Social Services. Led by the University of Melbourne, the project team included PRECI, professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, SNAKE, National Voice for Our Children, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and ACD, Advocating for Children with Disability. Coordination and production of the video series was led by PRECI.